Hello and welcome to Pulse, your weekly podcast delving into all things health, innovation, digital and data. Proudly brought to you by Pulse IT News. I'm your host, Louise Schaper.
And I'm your other host, George Margellis.
George, we are physically closer than I think we've ever been for any of our other episodes because we are both in Brisbane at the moment.
Yes, all three of us are up here for HIC, along with 700 of our best friends, and having a great discussion again around how health informatics in Australia has progressed over the last 20 so years.
Yes, it's always fun hanging out with 750 of your nearest and dearest in digital health, and so many new faces here, which I'm loving to see, as well as, the old faces too.
Absolutely. There have been quite a few young and excited health informaticians, and I've been very careful not to scare them away from the industry yet.
Well done, well done. That's not what we're aiming to do here. Oh, actually, a couple of people at the conference were giving me shit because they said in my introduction on the podcast, I say weekly podcast. And I think that's just been a Freudian slip because originally this podcast was going to be weekly, but I didn't realise I was saying weekly because it's not weekly at the moment. Of course, it's fortnightly. But I'm just confident we will get some new sponsors soon and then we'll be able to ramp it up so that when we're talking digital health news, it really is stuff that's happened in the last few days.
Well, the week that we're presenting it in is the most important week, so the other week doesn't really count.
Okay then, all right. I'm happy to run with that. Let's get to our first hot topic. So today, under a topic I like to say, follow the money, we are going to start by talking about money, specifically investor money. US company Rock Health have released their quarterly report, which documents how much venture capital money is going into US-based digital health companies. Now, this is relevant to healthcare systems across the globe because what we're talking about here is effectively health innovation, and you need money to create new innovation and to scale that innovation so that it can be utilised by consumers, clinicians, and healthcare systems everywhere. Startups and investors are a critical component of our health innovation ecosystem, and their importance and contributions, I'm sure, will continue to rise. So, what did we learn from Rock Health's latest report? In the first half of this year, US digital health startups raised $5.7 billion across 266 deals, so 266 investments. That means that funding is on track to surpass last year's total of $10.7 billion. Interestingly, in their report, it's interesting, but maybe not surprising, 1 in every $3 went to digital health startups utilising AI. What are you thinking about what Rock Health's report tells us? Where's the money flowing, George?
It is good to see the money coming back because last year was a particularly bad year as far as digital health investments went, and we saw lots of horror stories about the money disappearing. The question I do ask is one of $3 in digital health startups utilizing AI or just having AI in their title is, I guess, a question we need to ask.
That's right. It might just be AI in the pitch deck.
Exactly, and I guess you can't have a pitch deck without AI and you can't do a presentation without AI nowadays. I think it's a good sign. It's interesting it comes the day after the biggest stock market fall in Australian markets for many years. So hearing that investments are coming in is a good sign. Again, it's what are the outcomes of them? And I guess that's where we really need to focus. And I guess also, what does it mean for Australia? I mean, does it mean that all our startups are now going to pack their bags and head off to San Francisco again? What do we need to do to make sure smart ideas stay local? And I know people like Medical Angels and some of the other organizations around are working on that. But I think that's a really important thing we need to concern ourselves about. Does this cause yet another brain drain?
It's a real problem, isn't it? I reached out to a founder that I thought might be at this conference. And so I reached out last week and said, hey, you're going to be in Brisbane, let's catch up. And he said, and actually, no, I'm going to be in London. And instead of just telling me all the cool things he's doing in London, he actually messaged me back to say he's pretty annoyed because he's found that the level of investment here and the level of willingness, I guess, of people to invest as well as to give startups a chance, he's finding, I think he used the word inhospitable in Australia. So he's over in London doing his thing and I'm really happy for them, but it's not good.
The other thing, of course, is, the informed investors are now looking at digital health again as part of the solution going forward. That's a positive. We saw that big bump up during COVID and the sort of reflex loss. Hopefully the sine wave will stabilise and we'll come down to a more stable market locally and globally.
I'll put a link to Rock Health's report in the show notes because there's a really great graph, and I actually use it a lot in some of the keynotes that I give. And you see this massive big spike in 2021, and this is just American dollars, just American startups. They hit just over $29 billion in 2021 across 740 odd deals. We had this pandemic-fueled spike in investment. So I think you're right, George. Things seem to be leveling out now.
One thing I have noted, having walked through the HIC floor, that there are a couple of startups that are actually on the trade floor. And interestingly, many of them are now clinician-led. So I don't know what we're doing here. And we're starting to drive more and more clinicians to think about startups. And I know you can report some of the work you've done, Louise, but the clinician-led startups seem to have a more stable system behind them, so they recognize a problem and solving it. So maybe that's where we really need to put our focuses.
Brilliant. Yeah, let's talk about that at another show. We'll do a deep dive onto that, I think. Well, for our next topic, we are going to stay with the startup and investor side of our community. Good news, ladies. The femtech sector has had its first unicorn. Woohoo! For those unfamiliar with what the unicorn label means, it effectively means that your private company or startup is valued in excess of $1 billion US. It's a really big deal. This company, Flow Health, is a UK-based company that started as a period tracker app and then branched into fertility and menopause. However, critics have been quick to point out, and my own social feeds have been blowing up about this, that while it's great to have an app for women's health be so well funded, it does hark to a genuine critique about the sexism female founders experience when pitching to investors, because Flow Health was founded by men. The stark reality is that gender bias does exist in VC funding. And when you look at a global total, only 2% of VC funding goes to women-led startups. Now, while it's great Flow have been really successful, there have been many, many, many other apps founded by women who unfortunately didn't attract the capital, therefore couldn't grow and scale their companies, improve their product, and achieve financial success. Women's health remains critically underfunded, but maybe Flow Health's success will actually open up the minds of venture capitalists and the massive market potential for women's health innovation, therefore attracting a rise in capital being invested in this sector. Is this something that you've been seeing in your social feeds this week, George?
Yes, look, the social feeds have really focused on the fact that the women's health app has hit that unicorn status. It is disappointing that you note that VCs are still discriminate against female founders. I mean, we had the same situation in medicine 40, 50 years ago where 80% of doctors were male, and we've seen that shift change. So we actually know the last medical school intakes actually had more women than men applying and getting into med school, but it's what happens afterwards. So I think, and that's the key thing in VC world as well, is like just inviting them to do their pitch deck is one thing, but actively engaging with them. And gender shouldn't be the deciding factor here. It really is the quality, and that bias should no longer exist, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with you. And interestingly, the topics that I've been reading about and people's commentary online, it itself has been controversial as well, because I've seen a lot of comments from, I'm sure, well-meaning, generally male allies saying, well, hey, Flow Health, this is a great thing for women's health. And I would personally agree with that. And it increases the visibility of women's health as an issue that needs investment. I think the difficulty that some people have in understanding is that, like the Flow Health guys, so they were founded by men. Most of their executives are men. And the founders, I think they're twin brothers, who actually said that they saw a gap in the market. And, every woman I know would just laugh at that because, well, it's no surprise to us there's a gap in the market. We've been trying to get people's attention on this stuff for a really long time, but thank God a couple of blokes solved the issue for us. Aren't we all grateful? And it's a dichotomy that shouldn't exist, but let's hope something positive for women's health comes out of Flow's success.
I think to a large degree, it reflects a bias more in the banking and finance sector than it does in the healthcare sector. So hopefully the healthcare sector is a bit more advanced than that. Again, we really need to have as many people pitching as many good ideas as possible so that we can actually find solutions in this space.
100%. On to our next story, but it is related. I thought we would stick with this theme this week because, founding a company and achieving long-term financial success in healthcare, it's a really tough gig. 23andMe, if you haven't heard of it, I know you have, George, but if our PulsePoddies haven't heard of it, 23andMe is a US-based consumer DNA testing kit company. It was founded 18 years ago in 2006. Its founder and CEO, Anne Wojcicki, founded the company, and the idea was to give people insights into their health based on their genetics and gather data that could be used to solve healthcare challenges. Her husband at the time, now ex, is one of Google's founders, and he had a family history of Parkinson's and was an early investor in 23andMe. Reporters at the time loved to say that 23andMe was building the Google of DNA. At its height, 23andMe was one of the hottest startups in the world. Its saliva-based direct-to-consumer genetic testing business was actually named Invention of the Year by Time magazine in 2008. And following their listing on the stock exchange in 2021, the company was worth $6 billion US. Well, they're in the news recently because Wojcicki's offer to buy out her own company at 40 cents per share was rejected by her board. Awkward. Its value has crashed 98% from its peak heights, and the Nasdaq Stock Exchange has threatened to delist its sub-$1 stock. Like many startups, the company has never made a profit and it's burning cash quickly. Now, despite the challenges that 23andMe face, I personally think personal genomics has a massive big future, but there's some lessons here to be learned for us all. What are your thoughts, George?
23andMe came flashing into our vision 18 years ago with a message that genomics was the answer to all our problems and they were going to solve it all. And I guess that really is a classic example of over-promising and under-delivering. So to some degree, they're victims of their own marketing strategy. But the reality is genomics, you're right, it's going to play a very critical role, but we're still discovering what that role is. We made an assumption, I think it was Bill Clinton who told us, the end of disease was around the corner in 2001 when they did the first genome. And 23 years later, we haven't really progressed further than that. I think using something like the NASDAQ as your indicator of clinical success is probably the wrong indicator. They probably would have been better off demonstrating value before they went to the NASDAQ, but capital is what it is. That's the way people need to do things. It's a shame. I mean, like I said, it held great promise. Hopefully it'll pivot to something that'll provide more clinical value, more clinical utility, more value to the consumers who use it. And we have seen things like Ancestry.com take up some of that stuff that's come out of genomics and use it for different purposes that people want to explore and are more willing to pay for.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of not just necessarily 23andMe, but companies that offer those services. I'd be very, very happy to pay money to get access to my full genome and to know what's going on in family history and what I should do about it. One of the things I think 23andMe suffered from was you would get a report and it would tell you a risk of certain things, but there were no personalised action plans. All right, I have this information now and maybe I'm all clear, or maybe I've got the breast cancer gene or the Alzheimer's gene. What should I do about that? And in Australia, regulatory exists so that you really can't use 23andMe at all, and which is crazy. The Australian government did recently call for submissions to actually look at the availability of genetic testing in Australia as a direct-to-consumer thing. So we'll see where that's at.
There may be some advantage for us being a little bit late to market there so we can actually learn from others. And we've seen the big projects in the US and UK using genomics. And the reality is the amount of data we're gathering from genomics still requires us a bit of time to get our heads around how we're going to use it. In some oncology fields, in some rare disease fields, it's shown great promise and great capacity to lead to improvements. But whether it's what everybody needs and how we're going to utilize it is still on the drawing board, I think.
Yes, you're right. I'll just share a personal story with you, George. So my partner's American, so all his family members are in America. He's got 2 new relatives that he didn't know about. So it turns out, thanks to companies like 23andMe, Ryan has 2 sisters that he only found out about in relatively recent years. Ryan's dad, who passed before I met Ryan, his dad was a little busy in the 70s and not necessarily taking the precautions he should. And so through these services, I have a personal experience of seeing what's happened in Ryan's family. He's now got these older sisters who have had a whole life and have only discovered that they have a brother who lives in Australia relatively recently, and it's been wonderful to see that. Some people might think that it's a downside, but certainly his experience has been and the family all laughs about, if his dad was around now and how many more relatives are we going to find out that we've got. It's actually been a really nice thing for their family to expand, and they wouldn't know about each other if it wasn't for services like 23andMe.
That's right. That's why I pointed out. I mean, I know a lot of my colleagues and have used Ancestry.com and discovered that they have roots in places they didn't know. And I do have a friend who had a fairly similar experience who discovered siblings, though, they didn't know about. Again, we need to build up on this data set. We need to use the right analytical tools to get some value out of it. When we just look at rare diseases, I mean, something like 30% of all disease burden relates to rare diseases. So if we can work out ways of diagnosing them earlier, responding to them earlier. And then the whole next step, because the genome is just the matrix upon which proteins are built, and proteins are what interact with our cells. So there's a whole lot of learning ahead of us. So the next few decades in medicine and healthcare is going to be very exciting. We have to be careful we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater when we say, well, genomics doesn't work. We just need to think about how do we use it better.
100% agree. In our final hot topic today, George, I wanted to take us from these big global, big money, big strategy issues to something small and localised, but I think really powerful. A simple LinkedIn post by an orthopaedic surgeon in Melbourne caught my eye. The post's author, Ilan Friedman, wrote, and I'm quoting, "I'm pretty excited that my new website allows patients to book and confirm an appointment online. To the best of my knowledge, I am the only orthopaedic surgeon in Melbourne to offer this. Plenty of surgeons have a contact form where patients can leave their details and the secretary will contact the patient the next day. But I've integrated an online appointment booking feature which integrates directly with my EMR, so patients can book and confirm an appointment time at their convenience without needing to call or to stay on hold. And if I'm not the first, please correct me." And, this was a relatively small thing at one level, but a really big thing, I think. I just loved this post. I love that Friedman not only implemented this simple but very patient-centric change in his practice, but I also love that he posted about it, which signals not just a little bit of a humble brag, but that by promoting what he has done, hopefully his peers will think about doing the same. What are your thoughts, George? Is this something that might take off amongst orthopaedic surgeons everywhere?
To his defense, orthopedic surgeons have been the butt of many jokes in the medical field. So I suspect this may lead to a number more. Bit of New Zealand, Hot Doc and Health Engine have been doing it for a while. We can get appointments electronically. It's not revolutionary, but it is great now that specialists are doing it. So, like I said, I've been able to order an Uber for 10 years. It's only fairly recently my general practice has actually enabled me to book an appointment online. I had an experience recently where I had to see two different specialists, and one who actually did have an online booking portal. So I got to see him in 7 days, and one who didn't. And it took me a week to get through to their phone call, and I have an appointment for January 2025.
Oh, yay. Great.
This is really where the sector needs to catch up. And these are the back end things that we should have solved ages ago. Why do we need to ring someone and have 3 people sitting on the front desk waiting for a phone to call? We have Monday at 12:30 and I can't make Monday. Oh, and then we have Wednesday at 1. Making appointments is what calendars have been doing for many, many years. So it's great that Ilan's posting it. It's great that he's recognized that it's an important part to do. Now we just need to get every other orthopedic surgeon and cardiologist and respiratory physician and allied health. I mean, allied health is another one where we have challenges because of their lack of using PMS systems. Hopefully this should be a non-issue in the near future, I hope.
So that's why I wanted to give this guy a shout out, because I was like, this is really cool. He's done that. But yeah, it's sort of also a little sad that it's 2024. And, we're at this conference where we've got international speakers talking about not just AI and, cool new tech, but realistically what you can do with healthcare data when you capture it digitally. And our guest today on the podcast is going to be talking all about patient access to information. So, we still have a long ways to go to catch up, but I appreciate that this guy has taken the step. It's a good thing.
I don't know whether any of my children have made an appointment over a phone since they've become old enough to. So I think he's definitely alienating a huge part of the market if you don't have online tools.
Well, after this brief break, we will be back with our special guest of Pulse, Liz Salmi, one of the best advocates on the planet for patients having access to their own health information. And she's got the data to back up her case. Joining us today is a friend who likes to take credit for bringing punk rock to healthcare. Liz Salmi is a researcher and patient scientist based in California who works with one of the US's leading medical establishments, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. The American Society of Clinical Oncology just published a book which includes a chapter written by Liz and her co-authors. Liz is joining us to talk about her paper in that book titled When Bad News Comes Through the Portal, Strengthening Trust and Guiding Patients When They Receive Bad Results Before Their Clinicians. Liz Salmi, welcome to the PulsePod.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, so great to have you here. So Liz, what inspired you to focus on patient access to health information and what led you to author this particular paper?
Well, what led me to patient access to health information is I am a person living with a malignant brain tumor or a patient. And over just the last 7 years, I've been working with Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center on the OpenNotes movement, which is the concept of patients having full access to everything in the records in order to better understand their care and plan for their own health situations with themselves and their family and their doctor. And what inspired me, the actual question you asked is, what inspired you to write this book chapter? And what inspired me is I was asked to do it. I was asked to do it. And actually, so the American Society for Clinical Oncology, the world's largest oncology meeting of people, and every year about 40,000 people go to Chicago for this big cancer conference, essentially. And I was asked to speak on a panel with 2 other oncologists. And I think what the ASCO, that's the professional society, what they're hoping as the oncologists and oncology psychiatrists, and then I, a patient, a person living with cancer, we would go at it and like debate each other on the panel. And then I think they're hoping for some sort of like spicy conversation.
Some sparks.
Yeah. But then they say, hey, and since we've invited you guys to talk, could you also write something together that would be published in a journal? And that was the book. And when we all got together to talk about our talk, this is very meta, and then also talk about the book chapter and what we'd write, we realized we actually had a lot more in common than maybe what the big cancer conference thought. They were trying to spice it up and put it together. So that's where it came from. In the United States, we now have, for the last 2.5 years, this new law that basically says people should have access to their health information immediately. And that includes not just what doctors write, but also things like their test results and the pathology reports. And that's it's very cool. And it's something that the OpenNotes team, has really been advocating for the last number of years with, full transparency, being able to see your medical records. But in the cancer space, this has been kind of uncomfortable because sometimes people will see their pathology reports or the outcomes of their tests before an oncologist has a chance to see them and talk through them with the patients. And what we are learning is that some people like me who have been living with cancer for a long time, I can handle seeing my test results because I know, hey, I already have cancer. I still have cancer. I still have cancer. It's not surprising to me, but there is concern if it's a new diagnosis of cancer that some people might not want to hear about that through their computer.
Fantastic. The timing is great because we're having that debate here in Australia at the moment around access to clinical information, in particular pathology reports. So what were the key findings from that report? What was the answer?
There's OpenNotes, which is reading your progress notes, but then we have a kind of spin-off subgroup called Open Results or Open Test Results. And about a year ago, we're thinking, do people want to have immediate access to their test results? Like, that is a question nobody really had the answer for. So we asked patients, and I can detail everything about the study, but I'll just say, out of all of the people we asked, do you want to see your test results immediately? Spoiler alert, 96% of people who responded to our survey said that they did want to see their test results immediately. And I think it's important to break down what that study was and who we asked. Ultimately, this was a multi-site survey that was conducted across 4 academic medical centers across the US and kind of a geographically distributed situation. We asked 43,000 people to respond to the survey. More than 8,000 responded. So that's like a 19% response rate. So pretty good, but not like 100%.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. And it's important to also clarify that this survey was not just of people with cancer. This was a broad group of people. And so we asked, what kind of test result did you receive? Blood, imaging, biopsy, COVID. So some folks had received more than one test when they're responding to the survey. And we sent this to people who received a test result in the prior 1 month. So they had an idea in their mind, like, think back to that last test. And then we said, what was the purpose of this test? And they said it was either to follow an existing health condition, which was the majority of people, around 47%, or it's regular screening, or to look for something new. That's something that they had. And then from there, we asked patients, once you got that test result, did you do anything with it? And 40% of those folks said, we went to the internet to look for more information.
I'm surprised it was only 40%. You'd think it'd be even higher.
Well, we publish this in JAMA Open, so it's open access. Anyone can find it. You can look at the cool graphs that we created. But it was 40% said they did an internet search. But then, 9% said they asked a family member or friend. So they could have also been doing their own searches. And then 1% said they turned to social media. There's a mix of things. But what was interesting overall was that of those who looked at their test results, 8% of those said that they experienced more worry as a result of looking at their test result. And so we really dug into folks who experienced more worry. Was it just those who received the abnormal test result versus a normal test result? And really overall, some people felt like they experienced more worry, even if they had normal test results. So it's like these folks might just be worriers in general, but of those who had abnormal test results and didn't worry, it was actually more people who didn't worry. They just liked having access to the test result regardless. So it was about 36% of those who actually became less worried as a result of seeing their test result. So it's really what do you do with this? Still 96% of those folks, I'm just rattling off a ton of numbers right now. So go read the paper, but 96% still wanted to see their test result no matter what. 46% worried less. 8% worried more. And really then the question is, well, how do we do better for these patients if we're going to worry or not worry? And so it's zooming in on that worried population that we're thinking about now.
It's so great to have you on the pod, Liz, because you are one of the world's preeminent experts on what happens when you give patients access to their information. And everybody who couldn't keep up with all those numbers, you can rewind. But also, do we still say rewind in 2024?
Heck yeah.
But you can do that. But also, we will put a link to the paper in the show notes. So considering that patients typically respond quite well, and even the ones who find it creates anxiety, they still want their results, are there any other common benefits that you've identified for patients in having access to their own information?
Well, in the general OpenNotes world, the idea of, and I'm not sure if this is the case in Australia, or it's certainly not the case around the world, but just a couple of countries, to the best of my knowledge, have immediate access to information for patients. We know that Estonia started sharing everything in the records well before the US did. Sweden, the Nordic countries are definitely a transparency focusing on the OpenNotes movement. We've done research over the last dozen years ago or show that people really benefit from reading their progress notes. Tons of studies published in this space. You can go to opennotes.org/publications, search every element of OpenNotes and those benefits. But overall, what you see is when people read what their own doctors are writing about them and actually take a look at it, because not everybody's going to want to read what the doctor writes. But if they do, people in general feel more engaged in their care. They're like, oh, I understand what it is that my doc is saying. We remember more about our medical visits. We end up taking our medications as prescribed. And then there's a mutual trust that gets developed between doctors and patients. There's these historically disadvantaged populations who you might think, well, maybe they're not going to want to read their notes, but actually they benefit more because they find out what their doctors are saying about them behind the scenes.
On that point, because in Australia, I would argue we probably go to great lengths to make sure patients don't get access to our information. And I remember up until fairly recently, even if you went for an X-ray or for a scan, and in the old days where you were actually given the physical film, there was a little sticker on the envelope saying, do not open, for doctor only. Needless to say, no one actually followed that rule. I'll disclose I'm a grumpy old doctor. So the grumpy old doctors would argue that it's going to ruin our workflow. It's going to ruin our day. We're going to increase the number of people calling us at 3:00 in the morning saying, oh my God, I've just read that I have a lipoma. What does that mean? And You're telling you've got a chunk of fat stuck inside of your body. So what's the doctor's reaction been? How have they reacted to open notes and open reporting?
We kind of have this two different experiences. There's prior the rule, now it's called the 21st Century Cures Act, that required everything be open just in the last 2.5 years. And then there's before then. And then the before then times, doctors are like, I don't know if patients going to be able to understand their notes. Many studies were conducted where doctors were worried that patients were going to ask more questions, the workload's going to increase, they're going to get a million emails from their patients saying, I don't understand this, please explain this all the time. And we didn't see that happen. It just didn't happen. It's very rare. And if people had a question, they had a good reason for that question. And the studies were showing that doctors felt like, hey, patients' understanding is increasing. And then post this new era of the 21st Century Cures Act, what we're finding is it used to be doctors are worried patients will read the notes and be confused. And now it's 180. Doctors are like, we love open notes. Open notes is so great. We love the note. What we're scared about is the test result. We actually don't want the test result to happen. And so things have switched around. They suddenly love the open note because the note is written after the visit with the patient, and with the test results, their lab or their imaging lands in a patient portal where a patient can see it before they actually get to talk to their doctor. And that's where things are a little shaky. I've had people ask me, hey, Liz, you're a person living with cancer. How do you feel about this? And this is my opinion, is that I think people should have access to everything in the record if they want to look at it or not. But a little bit of anticipatory guidance should exist. Sometimes tests are ordered with no context, no conversation with the patient in advance. And there's like one of the things we say in this paper that we're talking about today is maybe a little simple script could be put into the portal message that could just say something like, hey, I am ordering a test. You might see the result before me, and you have a choice. Do you look immediately or you wait to hear from me? What questions do you have? And so just really putting it in the patient's mind that you can wait to hear from me or you can look in advance. And right now it's up to them.
How has it changed the way doctors communicate? Sharing open notes. I can see huge advantages. And my main work now is in aged care, and we have the great challenge that the carers don't know what's happening, yet alone the providers, and there's a lack of communication. Did doctors change their communication protocols? Did they change their way they document? Because some of the old documentation used a whole bunch of acronyms, which not everyone, and a good old SOB, short of breath, can have lots of connotations in this world.
In the early days of Open Notes, we realized that there were a lot of acronyms clinicians would use, and patients are now reading them wondering that very same thing. What does SOB stand for? So we started to notice for health systems that were practicing in an Open Notes environment, language did change. There was a study published in, I want to say it was Jamia, where some oncology clinician notes were run through some sort of algorithm to find out were oncology notes changing pre-open notes and post-open notes. And what you would find in general, and it kind of broke down evenly between 3 different ways, a third of the doctors in oncology settings didn't change anything. A third made their notes longer, and a third made their notes shorter, all recognizing they have a new set of eyeballs on the notes. And it was not just other clinicians, but also patients. So we're starting to see those things shake out now that more health systems across the US are practicing in this way. Different folks are learning how to document appropriately, knowing that patient readers exist. Also, as part of the Open Notes team at Beth Israel, we are part of the Harvard Medical School teaching hospitals. And so we have these first and third year medical students who are for the first time going through this Open Notes curriculum, recognizing that the next generations of doctors are going to be practicing in these Open Notes environments. So they're learning how to do their own charting, recognizing patients are the viewers of their notes.
Thank you. That's a really great strategy that healthcare providers can employ about how to modify their communication to really support patients. And I imagine that the simple act of doing that would foster better patient-provider communication, surely.
Absolutely.
Yes, my dad is going through cancer at the moment, and I can tell you every time I call and go, so what's on the agenda? What are you going to talk about? And then after he's had the appointment, what happened? And I just get told, he's really happy with my progress. And I'm like, your cancer isn't treatable. Are you sure there's not more information?
Do you have patient portals at all of your different health systems? You can kind of no. Okay, I'm seeing heads shaking.
No, we do have the My Health record, but this year what's happening is that Australia is going to be introducing legislation to actually mandate that pathology and diagnostic imaging needs to go into the My Health record, which not all Australians have chosen to have one of those, but it's there when you can turn it on whenever you like. And also to remove the current block, which is test results don't get shown for 7 days. That's, again, why it's so great to have you on the pod. What advice would you have for policymakers and the healthcare providers as we move towards this world of giving patients and consumers better access to their own health information?
I mean, the advice to policymakers in Australia is we already did the research on this.
You know it works.
Feel free to look at the research, and the research shows, we didn't catch on fire. The world didn't end. Everybody's still okay. Transparency is a good thing. Why reproduce all of these studies over and over again that have already happened in a number of different countries? Just go for it and open up the records to patients. And one of the things that happened here in the United States was that literally in the last 2.5 years, it's like there was a switch that happened overnight that said, anything that you're blocking from people, you must now share immediately. We've been this massive experiment, the entire United States, and things are okay. So Australia, it's going to be okay. And also, we did this an overnight sharing thing. It became immediate. And of all of the 50 states, which we have big diversity in this country, of all 50 states, we saw 2 states decide to implement state level legislation about blocking information. I don't know how much you know about all of the different states and general kind of characteristics, but Kentucky, which is in the South and usually seen as kind of a little bit of a conservative vibe, and California, which is seen as this very kind of more liberal vibe. So these 2 different states decided to block some information to people, but in specific situations. So just sharing this. And that was just around the release of cancer results, newly diagnosed cancer patients, not somebody like me who's been living with something for a long period of time and I figured it out. It's new diagnoses of cancer. So knowing that, I think people might say, should we keep doing this, sharing new cancer diagnoses with people? And that's something where our next realm of research is going into, to find out from people living with cancer and newly diagnosed folks, how would they prefer to receive that information? And I'll just say, baked into our electronic health records in every health system across the US, individuals like patients have the ability to go in and change their notification preferences. They just don't know those notification preference options are there. So really, health systems haven't done a good job of telling people you could have more choice and control over what you see in your health records, because people don't really do spend a lot of time on patient education and counseling around digital health, unfortunately.
I guess one of the big differences between our system and your system is that we have a middleman. So My Health Record is the middleman, and someone has to take some information from a clinical system, put it into My Health Record, and the consumer has to log into My Health Record. Look at it. You guys go directly. So how does that work from a software perspective? Do each provider need to have special software to do that? Does all clinical systems manage it? Is that a challenge?
I love how nerdy we're getting here. So there's the electronic health record vendors. And so the big ones, we have Epic here. I think you guys in some places have Epic. There's Cerner, Allscripts, or Cerner has a new name now. I'm forgetting right now. What is it?
Oracle Health.
Oracle, thank you. It's like the Microsoft, or essentially, or the Microsoft or the Google Docs, but of electronic health records. And so each health system kind of buys into their electronic health record system. And with that, they get this attached patient portal. So if I get care at 3 different health systems, UC Davis, UCSF, so on, and each one of those health systems will have their own version of a patient portal. So I have multiple logins, and it would be great if they just kind of all match together. And there are new tools and technologies that do allow you to do that as well.
Cool. And the other challenge we face here, of course, is that our hospital systems are separated from our primary care system. So we may end up with half a dozen logins. But again, there are tools available. Touching on that, I mean, one of the big tools now is the use of AI to generate summarized records. Is that being used at all as part of the OpenNotes, the sharing records perspective?
So our team, historically, OpenNotes has not creating any technology or platform. We're really just about studying what happens through transparency. Now, with this new realm of both the 21st Century Cures Act and people having access to everything, as well as AI, like the electronic health record platforms and vendors are using generative AI to help doctors. They're really focused on the payers, like, let's help doctors write their notes or respond to patient messages, things like that. So health systems are doing that, but there isn't as much of a focus on the benefits of AI tools for patients. So we've always been focused on like what's helpful for patients, and we are leaning into that space. And we have a couple studies we're doing. And then we do recognize that there are technology vendors who are creating these tools for health systems that we want to evaluate or be part of the co-design of some of those tools, because we know ultimately patients will be interfacing with those things, and we want to be working with patients on that stuff. And we are.
Excellent.
Liz, you're a ball of energy as always. So great to have you in PulsePod studio. Thank you so much. Finally, how can Pulse listeners stay informed about your work and the developments in this field?
Oh, thanks for asking. So my social media handle is the same on every platform. It's at the Liz Army, at the Liz Army. You can find me on those spaces, but you can learn more about my work at opennotes.org. And also I have my own blog still, patient blog from back in the day, and that's thelizarmy.com.
Thank you so much. We will put links to all of those feeds in the show notes. And of course, you do have one of the best, well, I was going to say Twitter handles, but now X handles of all time. I'm a proud member of the Liz Army.
Thank you.
And I encourage all our listeners to join. It's this fabulous movement that you're leading. And just thank you so much, Liz. It's been an absolute honour having you on the show.
It's great seeing you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now it's time for an update from our correspondent, Kate McDonald from the Pulse IT News Desk. Welcome to the Pulse Mobile Studio, Kate.
Thank you very much, Louise. We're all here in lovely Brisbane at the HIC conference, and it's been pretty fabulous, actually. This is the 12th HIC I've attended, which makes me feel very old. And there's a lot of familiar faces here, which is fantastic. HIC's always great because the big guns in the vendor community always turn out, and there's usually some pretty big product launches, and we've seen that this week. There's two big ones involving FHIR, and FHIR has been a dominant theme here at HIC. One is from Telstra Health, which is a FHIR API that will let third-party vendors easily integrate with its ecosystem for primary care providers. Primary care doesn't always get a lot of the publicity that the tertiary sector does, but Telstra Health has pulled out a pretty good product for them. And Alcidion, which is a ASX-listed company, has put out a version of the International Patient Summary, which will allow the exchange of patient information as they go overseas. Epic announced that it will be supporting the IPS in its release next year, so they're in with some pretty big guys there. Daedalus, which is a European company, launched its clinical trial portal technology in Australia, and we're also going to have some news later this week, hopefully, from Meditech, another EMR vendor, and Google Health on search and summarization using AI, which is absolutely intriguing, that using AI to search through a medical record. Other news we're following is back to New Zealand, which has been in the news for a couple of weeks now. We ran an opinion piece last week from Kiwi digital health veteran Tom Bowden. He's taken a different view to other people over the decision by the government to claw back funding for digital health. Tom reckons that New Zealand should instead use existing technology, including what are quite ubiquitous patient portals used by GPs in New Zealand to build shared health records. They can then be viewed in the emergency department. He's not a fan of centralised health records. We also heard from the Australian Digital Health Agency on the first year of its Connecting Care program, which has put a lot of time, money and effort into implementing interoperability in our healthcare system. There are actually some runs on the board, and that hasn't happened in the last 15 years of trying in Australia. And a lot of that has to do with the creation of the Sparked FHIR Accelerator, which was also pretty ubiquitous at HIC this week. It's everywhere. So The Australian Digital Health Agency is still trying to sell its idea of Provider Connect Australia, which is quite a good idea that will allow general practices and allied health practices to update their doctors' details and provider numbers if they change, and to send that out to third-party organisations all at once so the practice doesn't have to do it over and over again. It should make provider directories much clearer as well. The Australian Digital Health Agency has introduced a Smart on FHIR interface to allow practice management software vendors to incorporate PCA into their systems. But it's very hard going. There aren't that many people signed up as yet, but I reckon a FHIR interface is definitely the best way forward. So other than that, it's all been hick. I'm really enjoying the interoperability sessions here, and there's a lot on virtual care still. It was really great to hear from Chris Longhurst from UC San Diego Health this week at HIC on using AI in the real world. It was a brilliant presentation. It brings me back to HIC in Sydney, I think it was, when he presented with Professor Mike South from the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne about the different ways Americans and Australians use EMRs. They both use the same EMR, an Epic one, and just different ways of using them. And it was a great presentation with a loquacious American, as as they can be, and a very droll, humorous Briton in Mike South. And they really played off each other well. I wrote a story back then, so check out Pulse IT if you're interested. But I think that was one of the big highlights of HIC at the moment is using AI in the real world.
Thanks, Kate. You're right. That Mike Sow and Chris Longhurst's presentation was still being spoken about in the annals of digital health. Chris's was probably one of the best presentations. Actually, it has been the best presentation so far.
Well, I spoke to Chris. I've known him for quite a few years, and he's agreed to come onto the podcast as well. So we will feature Chris in an upcoming episode. He's got lots of interesting things to say. Kate, one of the things that I've heard wasn't in the room, so I was wondering if you've heard it as well, that apparently in one of the Sparked on FHIR sessions, it was hinted at, let's say, that there will come a time that it's likely that using FHIR will become mandated in Australia. Did you hear the same thing?
Well, certainly that would make a lot of sense. It's a universally agreed standard. You know, we can give incentives to vendors and hospital organisations in particular to use FHIR, but it takes a long time. Then mandating might be a way Australia will look at enforcing the use of standards, yes.
And personally, I have no problem with that because, again, mandate and support its adoption. So not just mandate and sort of say, now you're on your own, but if you mandate and support its adoption, then I think you have a sustainable plan going forward. And it's taken us a while to get to a good standard in message transport. So let's double down on it.
Yes, and for any of the PulsePods listening who are like, what are you guys talking about? Effectively, we're just talking about a standard that actually means that it's relatively simple to move data around. And so one computer knows what the other computer said and interprets it correctly. The FHIR people will probably hate me for that description. But, that's what we're talking about, just making sure that information in a secure way can effectively move around the healthcare system and, of course, follow the patient. That information needs to get where it needs to get. It helps patient care.
I briefly caught up with Kate Eberl today during HIC, and she tells me that the aged care software providers are starting to jump on board as well. So,
yay!
I think it's really important that we pick a standard and run with it, and that's where we're up to at the moment.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, Kate, thank you very much for all of your contributions in the pod today, and it's been great hanging out with you in Brizzy.
It's been fabulous, hasn't it? Brisbane's only bearable for 3 months of the year, and that's in winter. So we've come at the right time.
Great. I must say, actually, you like the cold, Kate, but all my Melbourne friends were texting me on the same day of arrival because the nighttime temperature in Brisbane, for those of you not here, it's basically about 10 or 11 degrees, which is actually warmer than Melbourne's daytime temperature at the moment. So it feels like summer here. It's like, I'm loving it.
And we won't even talk about what the temperature is like in Tasmania this time of year.
No, don't go there.
All right. See you soon, Kate.
Cheers.
So George, look, I'll admit I've completely got a girl crush on Liz Salmi. She is just so brilliant. I first met her, over 10 years ago now, I think, at Stanford's Medicine X conference that Larry Chu used to put on at Stanford, and that annual conference prior to COVID. Larry did a great job. He would not just invite patients to be at the conference, he would invite them to keynote. And not only keynote, but they would effectively lead a lot of the conversation. And there was a lot of programs as a result of the Medicine X conference that actually taught patients who had a personal experience in the healthcare system and how to take their personal experience into a thematic analysis and a strong advocacy position on behalf of patients everywhere. So it was so great to have Liz on the pod today.
Liz was great, and really things like the OpenNotes initiative is such an exciting initiative and something we really should be following around the world, because at the end of the day, healthcare is a team sport, and the most important player in that team is the patient or consumer. So really fantastic work. Interesting you mentioned Medicine X. I got my man crush on Abraham Verghese at Medicine X when I saw him presenting there, because he was the most eloquent and passionate presenter I saw about what doctors really should be concerned about. And he focused on doctors who need to be concerned about the people they're dealing with.
Excellent. Sounds like we've got another guest lined up for the future episode, George.
Absolutely.
And look, my personal bias here is I think it's completely unethical not to give patients access to their own information. And we will be covering this as things progress. But it was announced a year ago at the MedInfo conference in Sydney that Australia would this year enact a share by default legislation, which effectively it's a really cool thing because it means that pathology and diagnostic imaging providers will put your data into the My Health record. If you want it, it's there. And the passage of that legislation is going to be critical. We'll be keeping PulsePod listeners up to date on that progress. Speaking of MedInfo, I'll put in the show notes. Liz gave an amazing talk. So if you, like me and George, love Liz and are intrigued to learn more and be a part of the Liz army, see her details in our show notes. And I'll also put a link to the keynote that she gave in Sydney last year.
It's interesting because we keep on talking about workforce challenges in our sector, and yet there's the 24.5 million people who aren't part of the Australian healthcare workforce are forgotten. And they can play such a great role in making us improve our healthcare system by being actively engaged. So really looking forward to a system where self-care and consumer engagement and people playing an active role in their healthcare is going to be the norm rather than the exception.
Oh, absolutely. We're getting there. We're getting closer. George, thanks for joining me in our mobile PulsePod studio. If you could please read us out.
Thank you for listening to Pulse, brought to you by Pulse IT News. Pulse is produced by Ivan Jurek of Octopod Productions. Thanks to Nigel Chartres, Emily Mara and Kate McDonald for contributing to today's episode. Subscribe, follow and rate Pulse wherever you get your podcasts. You can subscribe to Pulse IT magazine at www.pulseit, all one word, .news. Send your feedback and questions to PulsePod@PulseIT News.